Today you will be learning about the conclusion of the Revolutionary War and the victory that was finally won by the Americans. This is Phase 4, Victory. The first piece to victory is that our friend John Adams was sent to France. John Adams was the man that defended the soldiers at the Boston Massacre, if you remember, and the man that helped write the Declaration of Independence. He traveled to France to help convince the French army and navy to come faster. It had been almost 2 years at this point since they promised their help and they had not arrived. If you remember, they promised their help after the Battle of Saratoga. While John Adams is in France, they promise that they will be on their way very soon. Without the help of the French, the American soldiers are still running very low on supplies. They experience another winter, much like the winter at Valley Forge, but this time located in Morristown. Despite the lack of supplies, our soldiers just keep going. They win battle after battle and keep fighting in this war for independence. Even the biggest traitor in all of American history couldn't stop the Americans from fighting for what they believed in and from winning this war for independence. The name Benedict Arnold is still synonymous today with being a traitor. Let's learn a little bit about Benedict Arnold. He actually started in the American Army as a general and a hero. He was very influential in the Battle of Saratoga, which, if you remember, was the turning point of the war and also the battle that convinced the French to join us as their ally. He was even very badly injured at the Battle of Saratoga. Still on Saratoga battlefield today stands a monument to Benedict Arnold's injury in his left foot. However, they've since taken his name off of it since he's now considered a traitor. Benedict Arnold grew very jealous quickly, though, and he was competitive with Washington. He got angry that Washington wouldn't pay him more or promote him fast enough. During his time when he was stationed as a soldier in New York, he fell in love with a loyalist named Peggy. This woman eventually convinced Arnold to betray the American army by selling secrets to the British. He even helped the British attack West Point, which was an important army college in New York. When he was caught, he ran to the British side for protection. If he had been caught by the Americans, he would have been hung to death. After the British lose the war, during which the rest of Arnold did nothing miraculous or important, he moves to England and dies alone with no respect from either the Americans or the British. In fact, the only reason we really talk about him today is because he's known as the ultimate traitor. Despite the French not joining us quick enough, having another freezing cold winter at Morristown, and traitor like Benedict Arnold, the Americans still forge on. Like I've said, the Americans have been winning battle after battle, yet they have not been able to squash the British Army completely. Their chance comes in the fall of 1781. The British general, Lord Cornwallis, stationed his army at Yorktown, Virginia. This is where Cornwallis was planning to camp for the winter of 1781. Washington decided that this was his opportunity to squash the British once and for all, partially because our long-lost friends, the French, had finally arrived almost 4 years after promising us their army and navy help. Washington and the American army surround the British at Yorktown. The French also join in surrounding the British on land and at sea. We were able to surround Lord Cornwallis because we had snuck him fake intelligence that Washington was actually headed to New York, so Lord Cornwallis's guard was down. The Americans, with help from the French army and the French navy, surrounded and decimated the British army. Cornwallis had nowhere to escape to and had no choice but to surrender to Washington at the end of the battle. This battle is very significant because it signifies the end of the Revolutionary War. The revolution couldn't officially end until KG3 admitted his loss. So the next 2 years after Yorktown were pretty crazy. All the loyalists left in America flee because they were scared that the winning patriots, aka the winning Americans, would retaliate against them. They were worried that the winning patriots would physically hurt them, would steal their property, and even maybe resort to killing them. So they flee to places like Nova Scotia or the American West. They knew after the Battle of Yorktown, this war was pretty much over. However, KG3 still won't admit his loss. Meanwhile, in Britain, the British people are sick of this 8-year-long war. The British Parliament decides to take a vote to end this war. They are sick of it. They don't think the colonies are worth it and are not willing to risk their men to die and fight in America anymore. Despite this vote from Parliament, KG3 still won't admit defeat. Even though the king is still yet to admit defeat, that doesn't stop America from moving on. We begin to ask other nations in the world for formal recognition. Formal recognition is when one country says another country is real and that they are independent. This is so important because without recognition, it is impossible for a country to make treaties, to trade with other nations, or to get aid during times of need. The first country to recognize America formally is actually the teeny country in Africa called Monaco. Even though Monaco is the first to recognize us, it doesn't take other countries like Spain, France, and Portugal to recognize us very quickly. Because the king won't admit defeat, the Americans appoint John Adams to go to England to try to convince him to end this war once and for all. John Adams spends several months in England negotiating with the king, but he is finally successful and KG3 agrees to allow America to have their independence. Once KG3 agrees to American independence, the two countries agree to sign a formal treaty ending the revolution. This treaty is called the Treaty of Paris. It wasn't signed until almost 2 years after the Battle of Yorktown. This is signed in 1783. The terms of the treaty are: Great Britain will formally recognize the United States as an independent country. This was very important considering the United States was breaking away from Great Britain. The second high point was that United States and Great Britain would formalize the borders between their two countries. We'll be looking at a map in a moment so you can see the amount of land America gains at the end of this war. Both countries agreed that they contributed to the causes of the Revolutionary War. Yes, Great Britain did tax us without representation, but the Americans didn't necessarily listen to the laws of their mother country. Because it was such a long and costly war, both sides agreed to pay their own debt. So America will pay for American debt, and British will pay for British debt in this war. Finally, the king negotiated for all loyalists to be protected if they decide to remain in America. They were supposed to be given back their property and be given safe haven. However, since the British aren't left around to enforce this, most loyalists do not get their property back. And in fact, most loyalists don't even really try to move back into what are now the first 13 states, no longer 13 colonies, of America. In these maps, you can see that before the war, all this land in orange was British. right here on the coast are where our 13 colonies are located at. You can see all this land in purple belongs to the Spanish. After the war, Great Britain gives up all of this land in pink to what is now America or the United States. The United States will only consist of 13 states, the original 13 colonies. Those are from Georgia all the way up to New Hampshire. All this other land remains very sparsely settled. Everything you see in purple is still owned by the Spanish. You can see that they get Florida back since they helped Americans fight and win this war. Many things happened at the end of the Revolutionary War. Most importantly is that Americans gained their independence and their declaration stood. However, there are many other costs and outcomes to this 8-year-long struggle for freedom. There were more than 1,300 battles at both land and sea. That totals about 25,000 American deaths. Only 6,000 of these were actually killed in battle. More than 10,000 died of disease, things like smallpox and dysentery. However, what's probably most tragic is about 8,500 Americans lost their lives while being held as prisoners of war by the Empire of Great Britain. Most of these prisoners of war died in those prisoner of war ships that were disease infested and where prisoners were treated very poorly. At the end of this war, Americans owe more than $11 million to its allies, countries like Spain and France. However, we've got a big problem. America doesn't have any money. The American dollar does not exist yet. Each state is producing and making its own money, which meant nothing to France or to Spain. These countries could have cared less about Virginia dollars, Massachusetts pennies, or Vermont nickels. They were quickly going to have to figure out a way to raise money for debt without collecting more taxes. These problems will all lead to big discussions that have to be had about our brand new baby country.